Are there names you're looking into?
No.
Would you say the investigation is growing or shrinking?
In terms of leads and working and getting out there, I think that's still growing, yeah.
A big break in the case, this Nest camera footage released 11 days ago, showing a suspect on Guthrie's doorstep the night of the kidnapping.
I think we're getting a little closer to identifying some of the other articles, not just that backpack, like the shoes, the pants, the shirt or jacket.
Another key lead, unknown DNA found inside the Guthrie home, potentially belonging to the suspect. Nanos says the samples are mixed, meaning they contain DNA from more than one person, making it harder to run through national databases.
Our lab tells us that there's challenges with it. The technology is moving so fast and in such a frenzy that they think some of this stuff will resolve itself just in a matter of weeks, months, or maybe a year.
Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 3 weeks. The 84-year-old mother of Today Show host Savannah Guthrie vanished from her Tucson home on February 1, 2026. Blood on her front steps. A masked figure caught on camera at her door. Investigators have DNA. They have gloves found 2 miles from her house. They have biological evidence collected from inside her home. They have multiple DNA profiles. They submitted everything to the national database. No match. And now, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos says it could take weeks, months, or maybe a year to get answers. Maybe a year. Nancy Guthrie could be alive somewhere right now. Or she could be in danger. Or worse. And the DNA that might lead investigators to her sits in a lab waiting for technology to catch up with urgency. How does this happen? How does a high-profile kidnapping case with physical evidence turn into a waiting game? And what happens to Nancy while everyone waits? Welcome back to Crime Spectre. If you watched our first video on Nancy Guthrie, you know the basics. 84 years old. Mother of Savannah Guthrie. Disappeared from her Tucson home February 1st. FBI involved. Reward now at $100,000. Let me start with what investigators actually collected. On February 4th, 3 days after Nancy disappeared, officers found multiple gloves within a 1.5-mile radius of her home. The gloves were scattered. Not together. Different locations. All sent for DNA testing. That DNA was submitted to CODIS, the National DNA Database. No match. Whoever wore those gloves is not in the system. But that's not the only DNA they have. Inside Nancy's home, investigators collected what they're calling biological evidence. Hair. Skin cells. Sweat. Blood. The kind of trace evidence people leave behind without realizing it. And here's where it gets complicated. They found multiple DNA profiles. Not one person's DNA. Multiple people. The sheriff won't say how many profiles. But multiple means at least 2. Could be 3. Could be more. And some of that DNA is mixed, meaning different people's genetic material got combined in the same sample.
A glove a few days ago was found within about 2 miles of the house. Somebody found it and called us. It was basically a discussion about where should this go. Well, all of the evidence from our crime scene, biological, went to our lab. In fact, the most recent search warrant we did up in Rio Rico, that all went to our lab. So it made sense that we have all of that evidence, all of the identifiers for those people that lived at the house, worked at the house, maybe it's a landscaper, a housekeeper, a pool boy, all of that was at our lab.
Sheriff Nanos told reporters on Friday, February 21st, that the lab has reported challenges with the samples. Challenges. That's the word he used. When you have mixed DNA, when you have degraded samples, when you have biological evidence that's been contaminated or exposed to the elements, it becomes exponentially harder to analyze. You can't just run it through a database and get a name. You need advanced technology. You need time. And time is the one thing Nancy Guthrie doesn't have. Here's another detail that complicates everything. The DNA found on the glove does not match the DNA found inside Nancy's home. Different people. So either multiple people were involved in her disappearance, or some of the DNA is unrelated to the crime. Maybe it's from a family member who visited. Maybe it's from a contractor who worked on the house. Maybe it's from Nancy herself. Investigators have to sort through all of that. They have to isolate what matters and what doesn't. And that process takes time. CODIS stands for Combined DNA Index System. It's the FBI's national DNA database. Launched in 1998. Contains profiles from convicted offenders, arrestees in some states, and forensic evidence from unsolved crimes. As of now, CODIS has over 20 million profiles. If you've been convicted of a felony in most states, your DNA is in there. If you've been arrested for certain crimes, depending on the state, your DNA might be in there. If you left DNA at a crime scene and investigators uploaded it, it's in there. When investigators found DNA on those gloves near Nancy's home, they submitted it to CODIS. They were hoping for a hit. A match. A name. Someone already in the system. Someone with a criminal history. Someone they could track down immediately. They got nothing. No match. That means whoever left that DNA has never been convicted of a crime that required a DNA sample. Or they've never been arrested in a state that collects DNA from arrestees. Or they're not in the system at all. And here's the thing about CODIS. It only works if the person is already in the database. It's not magic. It's a matching tool. If the suspect has no criminal history, if they've never been arrested, if they've never had their DNA collected for any reason, CODIS is useless. So now what? Now investigators turn to a newer technology. Investigative Genetic Genealogy. IGG. Investigative Genetic Genealogy is what solved the Golden State Killer case. It's what identified Bryan Kohberger in the Idaho student murders. It's what's being used more and more in cold cases and active investigations when CODIS fails. Here's how it works. Investigators take the DNA from the crime scene and upload it to a public genealogy database like GEDmatch or Family Tree DNA. Not the commercial ones like Ancestry or 23andMe, which have stricter privacy policies. The public ones where people voluntarily upload their DNA results to find relatives. The system looks for genetic matches. Not exact matches. Partial matches. Third cousins. Fourth cousins. People who share enough DNA with the suspect to indicate they're related. Then genetic genealogists build family trees. They go back generations. They figure out who the common ancestors are. They narrow down branches. They identify potential suspects. And eventually, they get a name. But here's the problem. IGG only works if a relative uploaded their DNA. And if they didn't? Investigators are blind. The Golden State Killer case took genealogists 4 months to identify Joseph DeAngelo after law enforcement uploaded the DNA. Bryan Kohberger was identified relatively quickly. But some cases take years because the suspect's relatives haven't uploaded their DNA to those databases. Or because the suspect's ancestry doesn't have enough genetic data in the system. African American and Hispanic suspects are harder to trace through IGG because those populations are underrepresented in genealogy databases. Most people using these services are white and of European descent. And here's the brutal reality Sheriff Nanos admitted on Friday. IGG could take 20 minutes. Or it could take 7 years. 20 minutes if they get incredibly lucky and find a close relative match immediately. 7 years if they have to build out massive family trees and the suspect comes from a population with limited genetic data in the system. Sheriff Nanos said the lab told him weeks, months, or maybe a year. Maybe a year. That's the timeline they're working with. And Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 3 weeks. The public is furious. Social media exploded after Sheriff Nanos made that statement. Weeks, months, or maybe a year. People are demanding answers. Why isn't the FBI taking over the DNA analysis? Why isn't this being fast-tracked? Why are we waiting on technology that might take a year when an 84-year-old woman is missing? Savannah Guthrie has been mostly silent on social media since the early days of the investigation, but the frustration from Nancy's family and the public is palpable. 18,000 tips have been called into the Pima County Sheriff's Office. 18,000. But here's what the dispatch manager said publicly. Please only call with credible, viable information. That's a polite way of saying most of those 18,000 tips are not helpful. They're theories. They're premonitions. They're people who think they saw someone who looks like Nancy in a grocery store 3 states away. They're armchair detectives speculating about what might have happened. Sheriff Nanos has repeatedly asked people to stop playing detective online and let law enforcement do their job. But the anger isn't just about internet sleuths. It's about the system. It's about the fact that we have DNA evidence in 2026 and we're still talking about waiting months or a year for results. It's about the fact that Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old, she requires daily medication, she has limited mobility, and every day that passes makes it less likely she's still alive. And the DNA that could find her is sitting in a lab moving at the speed of science, not the speed of urgency. Investigators are not just sitting around waiting for DNA results. They're using other technology. Bluefly Bluetooth and Wi-Fi detection has been deployed. This is equipment that can pick up signals from electronic devices. If Nancy has her phone, if she has any Bluetooth-enabled device, if whoever took her has electronics nearby, Bluefly might detect it. They've also put what they're calling a signal sniffer on a helicopter. This device is searching for Nancy's pacemaker. Pacemakers emit signals. Not constantly. But they do communicate with monitoring equipment. If her pacemaker is still transmitting, if she's within range, the helicopter might pick it up. Critics have questioned whether releasing information about the pacemaker search publicly was wise, potentially tipping off whoever took Nancy and giving them a chance to disable the pacemaker or move her out of range. Whether that criticism is valid or not, the fact remains that the pacemaker search hasn't located Nancy yet. The FBI is also involved. They're the ones who recovered the surveillance footage 12 days after Nancy disappeared. That footage was not initially available to investigators. The FBI later retrieved it directly from Google's back-end servers, pulling video showing a masked suspect at Nancy's door. The delay in obtaining this critical evidence raised questions about the investigation's early handling. And there are polygraph tests. Sheriff Nanos mentioned that polygraphs are being used as part of the investigation. He didn't say who's being polygraphed. He didn't say what the results were. But polygraphs are typically used to clear people or to focus attention on someone who fails. The family has been officially cleared. On February 16th, Sheriff Nanos said investigators took the family's phones, computers, processed their vehicles and homes, and found nothing. They're victims, he said. Not suspects. While investigators work the case with facts and evidence, the internet is working the case with speculation. 2 theories have gained traction online, and it's important to address them as what they are. Theories. Not facts. First, the Google Trends theory. Reports surfaced that someone in Arizona searched for Nancy Guthrie's address in June 2025 and again on January 11, 2026, just 3 weeks before she was taken. The same week in December, someone in Tucson searched for Savannah Guthrie's salary. Criminal profilers said this looks like target profiling. Pre-offense behavior. But Google itself said Google Trends data for uncommon searches often includes random noise to protect privacy. The data is not independently verified. Law enforcement has not confirmed this as a lead. Second, the Mexico theory. TMZ received emails claiming Nancy was seen south of the border. The FBI contacted Mexican federal law enforcement. A volunteer group called Madres Buscadoras de Sonora, Searching Mothers of Sonora, came to Tucson to help search. These are mothers who have recovered 2,700 bodies and reunited 2,400 living people with families in Mexico. Their involvement sparked speculation that Nancy was taken across the border. But Sheriff Nanos has repeatedly said there is no evidence Nancy is in Mexico. Border Patrol cameras came up empty. A private investigator working the case said he does not believe she crossed the border. Too much surveillance between Tucson and Mexico. His theory is that Nancy is likely 100 to 130 miles north of Tucson, somewhere between Tucson and Phoenix or Mesa. These are theories. They're interesting. They're plausible. But they're not confirmed. What is confirmed is that DNA evidence exists, it's being analyzed, and it could take months or a year to get results. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 3 weeks. She's 84 years old. She needs medication. She has limited mobility. And somewhere in a lab, DNA evidence that might solve this case is being processed at a pace that feels unbearably slow to everyone watching. Sheriff Chris Nanos said weeks, months, or maybe a year. Maybe a year. That's not a failure of law enforcement. That's the reality of DNA technology when samples are mixed, when CODIS returns no match, when investigative genetic genealogy is the next step. It's the reality of science moving slower than urgency. The public is angry. Savannah Guthrie's family is waiting. Thousands of tips have been called in, most of them not viable. The FBI is searching. The sheriff's office is working. Technology is being deployed. But time is the enemy here. Every day that passes, the chances of finding Nancy alive decrease. And the DNA that could lead investigators to her might not give them answers for months. If you have credible, viable information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, contact the Pima County Sheriff's Office or the FBI. Credible information. Because Nancy Guthrie is still out there somewhere. And time is running out. If this case moved you, subscribe to Crime Spectre for updates as this investigation continues. Hit that notification bell. Nancy Guthrie's family deserves answers. And the DNA delay is just one of many frustrations in a case that should have been solved by now.